I spoke up when she yelled at my granddaughter. My daughter-in-law turned to me and snapped, "Discipline isn't your job, you already failed with your own son." My son said nothing. I left the room, sat in my car, and took out a letter from my late wife that had instructions she never wanted my daughter-in-law to see what that letter contained. I sat in the hard kitchen chair, listening to my own heartbeat slow down after what had just happened. My hands would not stop shaking. Not from fear, I was past fear. They shook the way old machinery shakes when it has been pushed past the point it was ever designed to reach. 72 years of careful, measured restraint, and it had taken one 6-year-old girl with a broken crayon to finally crack something open inside me that I suspected had been waiting a very long time to break. "Stop it, you're being ridiculous." That was how it started. Elena's voice cutting through the living room like a table saw through soft pine, sharp and precise and designed to leave a clean, ugly wound. Little Maeve stood in the middle of the rug, one half of a red crayon in each hand, her face crumpled up the way a child's face crumples right before the tears come. She had accidentally snapped it, pressing too hard on her drawing. An accident. The kind of small, meaningless accident that happens 100 times in a child's life and means absolutely nothing. Except to Elena, everything meant something. Everything was an offense. Every crayon, every spilled cup, every crooked shoelace was evidence that Maeve was failing some invisible test that no child should ever have to take. I pushed myself up from my chair. My knees ached the way they always do in cold weather, and the bones in my lower back sent their usual complaint up along my spine, but I stood. "That's enough," I said. "She's just a child." Elena turned to look at me. I had seen that look before, on foremen who resented a suggestion from a floor worker, on people who believed their authority was the only authority that mattered in any given room. Her eyes went hard and bright at the same time, the way glass looks right before it shatters. "Discipline isn't your job," she said. Her voice dropped lower, which was somehow worse than when it was loud. "You already failed with your own son." The room went completely still. I heard the clock on the mantel ticking. I heard the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere outside. I felt the words land somewhere in my chest in the specific place where old wounds live, the place you spend decades learning to protect because you know how easily it opens. I looked at Daniel, my son. 40 years old, sitting on the couch with his phone in his hands, his eyes fixed on the screen with the particular concentration of a man who has decided that if he does not look at something, it is not happening to him. He said nothing. I did not argue with Elena. I did not defend myself. I had learned a long time ago that defending yourself against a person like her only gave her more ammunition, more proof that you were the problem, more material to use later. I simply nodded once slowly, the way you nod when you understand something deeply and completely, and I turned, and I walked out of that house and down the 3 porch steps and into the cool evening air and got into my car. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 72 years old, and for most of those years I have been what most people would call a patient man. I worked 40 years as a machinist in a plant outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of job where patience is not a virtue but a survival skill. You learn to watch the tolerances, to measure twice, to wait for the right moment to make your cut. You learn that rushing something usually means ruining it. I brought that same philosophy home every night and applied it to my marriage, to fathering Daniel, to everything. My wife Elena used to say that I was the most patient man she had ever loved, and then she would pause and add that patience was not always the same thing as wisdom. She was right about most things. I understand that better now than I ever did when she was still alive. I sat in the car for a long time without starting the engine. The street was quiet. A neighbor's dog barked twice and then stopped. The sky had gone that particular shade of dark blue it turns in October just after the sun drops completely below the horizon, deep and cold, and without any warmth left in it. I opened the glove compartment because my hands needed something to do, and that is when I saw the envelope. I had placed it there myself, almost 2 years ago, when I drove home from the attorney's office after Elena's affairs were settled. She had given it to me in her final weeks, pressed it into my hands with that serious, unhurried look she had when she wanted me to understand that she was not speaking lightly. The envelope was cream-colored once, but it had gone yellow with time. The paper was soft at the edges from being moved around. Her handwriting on the front, the careful, looping cursive she had learned in Catholic school in 1965, reads simply, "Harold, for when you cannot wait any longer." She had made me promise not to open it unless I reached a point where I had no other choice. I had kept that promise for almost 2 years, through dinners where Lena cut Daniel off mid-sentence and no one said anything, through holidays where Maeve sat too quietly for a child her age, through the slow accumulation of small moments that I had kept telling myself were not quite enough to warrant breaking Elena's seal. Not quite enough to justify what I feared the letter might ask of me. I held the envelope in my trembling hands and thought about Maeve's face, the way her lip had quivered, The way she had not cried out, she had just stood there, absorbing the cruelty the way a child absorbs things when she has been taught that crying is not safe. That was the detail that undid me, not the yelling, not even Elena's words to me. It was the fact that Maeve did not cry. She just stood there and took it and waited for it to be over, because somewhere along the way, this small, bright, 6-year-old girl had learned that waiting for it to be over was safer than reacting. I broke the seal. Elena's letter was 4 pages, written front and back in her careful hand. I will not reproduce all of it here because some of it was private, between a husband and a wife, words meant only for the two of us. But the parts that mattered, the parts that changed the course of everything that followed, were clear and precise and devastating in the way that only the truth can be devastating when you have been half aware of it for years and have chosen not to look directly at it. Elena wrote that she had been watching Elena since Daniel first brought her home 7 years before Elena died. She wrote about specific incidents, things I had witnessed and filed away as nothing, things I had not witnessed at all that Elena had seen and recorded in her memory with the thoroughness of a woman who understood exactly what she was looking at. She described patterns. The way Elena controlled social situations by making everyone around her feel slightly off balance. The way she spoke to service workers with a particular edge of contempt that she disguised as high standards. The way she managed Daniel's confidence over the years, quietly, incrementally, until the man who had once been a somewhat timid but essentially decent young person had become someone who sat on a couch, staring at his phone, while his daughter was humiliated in her own living room. And then there was the final line, the one that made the hair on my arms stand up. If she ever harms that child the way she hides her anger, you must not stay silent again. And Harold, if you are reading this, it means you waited too long. Do not wait any longer. I sat with that sentence for a very long time. Outside the car, the neighborhood had gone fully dark. A porch light clicked on down the street. I thought about Elena, her sharp, quiet intelligence, the way she had always seen things before I did, the way she had spent 43 years gently, patiently trying to teach me that there was a difference between restraint and cowardice, and that I had never quite managed to learn it all the way through. She had seen this coming. She had prepared for it. She had left me instructions because she knew that I would need them. My flaw, the one Elena had identified correctly and weaponized with surgical precision, was exactly what it appeared to be. I was too patient, too willing to absorb, too convinced that the best response to cruelty was quiet endurance, because endurance had always felt more dignified to me than confrontation. It was the lesson I had learned from my own father, a man who worked himself nearly to death without ever complaining. And I had carried it like a badge of honor my entire life. But Elena's letter made something clear that I had been avoiding for a very long time. Endurance without action is not dignity. It is abandonment. I had endured through all of it, and in doing so I had abandoned my son to become what he had become, and I had abandoned my granddaughter to be raised by a woman who made her feel that existing was something she needed to apologize for. I drove home, but I was not the same man who had left. The first thing I did when I got inside was go to the small desk in my bedroom where I keep a legal pad and a pen. I sat down and I started writing. Date, time, what I had witnessed, word for word what Elena had said, what Maeve had done, what Daniel had done or more accurately had not done. I wrote it all out in the clean, precise way I used to document machine tolerances at the plant, without emotion, without editorializing, just the facts laid flat on the page where they could not be argued with. That was the machinist in me. Measurements do not have feelings, they just are what they are. I want to be honest about the next few weeks because I think honesty is important, even when it is uncomfortable. What I felt during those weeks was not purely noble. Part of what drove me was righteous anger on behalf of my granddaughter. But part of it, and Elena's letter had warned me about this too, had said, watch yourself, Harold. You are not immune to your own darkness. Part of it was personal. Elena had said I failed with my own son. She had said it in front of Daniel, in front of Maeve, in a voice designed to humiliate me as thoroughly as possible. And it had worked. It had landed in that old wound in my chest and it burned there, and I would be lying if I said the burning was entirely about Maeve. Some of it was about me. Some of it was about being a 72-year-old man who had spent his whole life trying to do right by the people he loved, and being told in front of his family that he had failed at the most important thing. That anger worried me, not because I was wrong to feel it, but because I knew what anger does to judgment. I had seen it at the plant, men who were right about the problem, but wrong about the solution because they let the anger run the show instead of the thinking. I made myself a rule, written down at the top of every page of my legal pad: do not act from the wound, act from the evidence. So I watched, and what I saw made the anger feel small and cold, and very, very righteous. Elena's discipline was not the hot, impulsive kind, the kind that comes from exhaustion or frustration or a parent at the end of their rope. That kind, while not right, is at least human. What Elena practiced was something colder and more calculated. She ran the household the way a warden runs a facility, through a combination of unpredictability and precise, controlled consequence. Maeve never quite knew what would set things off, which meant Maeve was always braced, always flinching slightly ahead of the moment, anticipating pain before it arrived. I watched her apologize for things she had not done wrong. I watched her ask permission before doing ordinary things that children simply do, picking up a toy, turning on the television, getting a glass of water. I watched her flinch when a door closed too loudly. One afternoon, about 10 days after I had started keeping my notes, I found Maeve sitting by herself in the hallway outside the kitchen. I sat down next to her on the floor, my old knees protesting, and she leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when she was smaller. "What are you doing out here, sweet girl?" I asked. "Waiting," she said. "What are you waiting for?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "For Mommy to not be mad anymore." I kept my voice very steady. "Are you scared?" She thought about it seriously the way 6-year-olds do, giving the question the full weight of their limited but genuine understanding. "A little," she said, "but if I'm quiet she usually goes back to normal." I wanted to pick her up and walk out of that house and never come back, but I remembered Elena's instruction: do not accuse without proof. Proof that would hold up not just to me, not just to Daniel, but to the people who would need to make decisions about this child's safety. That evening I went to the hardware store and bought a small wireless camera, the kind that looks like a smoke detector. I told Daniel I was putting in a home security system because I had seen a news segment about break-ins in the area. He barely looked up from his phone. "Sure, Dad," he said, "whatever you think." That might have been the most painful moment of those 2 weeks, not Elena's cruelty, my son's absence. The way he had become so thoroughly managed that he no longer even participated in the running of his own home, just floated through it like a ghost who had not yet realized he was dead. I placed the camera in the hallway where it had a clear angle into the main living area. I set it to record continuously and upload to a cloud account I had created for this purpose. I am not a technology person. I spent most of my career working with metal and oil and calibrated steel, but my neighbor Clive, who is 68 and considerably more comfortable with these things than I am, helped me set it up over the course of an afternoon without asking too many questions. Clive has lived 3 houses down from me for 20 years. He looked at my face when I explained what I needed and he said simply, "You know what you're doing, Harold." And I said, "I think so." And he said, "Good enough for me," and we never discussed it again. The doubt came at night, the way all real doubt does. I would lie in my bed in the dark and my mind would run through the argument against what I was doing. You are a 72-year-old man who is grieving his wife and resents his daughter-in-law, and is now secretly recording his family's home like some kind of paranoid old man who has watched too much television. Maybe Maeve's quietness is just her personality. Maybe your standards are too high. Maybe Elena's letter was the concern of a dying woman who was seeing danger where there was only difficulty. Maybe Elena is just a strict parent and not the thing you are building her into in your mind. I would lie there in the dark and think about those things and let myself feel the full weight of the possibility that I was wrong. And then I would remember Maeve saying, quietly and with the particular resignation of someone who has accepted a bad situation as permanent, "If I'm quiet she usually goes back to normal." And the doubt would thin out, and the certainty would come back, cold and absolute, like a measurement that keeps coming back the same no matter how many times you check it. 3 weeks into my watch, I was in the kitchen around 9 in the evening, washing up the last of the dinner dishes, when I heard it from the direction of Maeve's bedroom. First the sharp adult voice, too muffled through the walls for me to make out words, rising in that controlled but vicious way I had come to recognize. Then the silence that was worse than the voice. Then a sound, a crack, flat and sharp, the unmistakable sound of an impact. Then nothing. Then, after a moment, the barely audible, muffled sound of a child, trying very hard not to cry loudly enough to be heard. I stood at the sink with my hands in the dishwater and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. My first instinct, the old instinct, the one that had ruled my life for 7 decades, was to tell myself I was not sure of what I had heard, to wait, to measure again, to be certain before acting. I recognized that instinct for what it was. I recognized it as the instinct that had sat on a couch staring at a phone while his daughter was humiliated. I dried my hands on the dish towel and I walked down the hallway to the camera upload on my phone, and I confirmed that it had recorded what had just happened. And then I went to bed, not because I was calm, because I had a plan now, and plans require patience, and this was the one situation in my life where my particular flaw was actually useful. The next morning I woke up before everyone else. I made coffee. I sat at the dining room table with Elena's letter in front of me and the phone next to it, and I waited. When I heard movement upstairs, I got up and took 2 chairs away from the table so that there were only 2 left, facing the head of the table where I sat. When Daniel came down in his work clothes, tie not yet knotted, he looked at the table arrangement with a slight frown. What's going on? He said. Sit down, Daniel. Dad, I'm already late, I have a. Sit down. Something in my voice stopped him. He pulled out the chair and sat. A moment later, Elena came into the kitchen, dressed and composed. And she saw me, and she saw Daniel, and she saw the way I was sitting. What is this? She said. Sit down, Elena. I beg your pardon. She said it the way she always said things she felt were beneath her dignity to take seriously, with a slight upward tilt of the chin. Sit down. I let the silence hold for 2 full seconds. Please. She sat, not because she respected me, because something in the stillness of that morning had told her that whatever was about to happen was not something she could deflect by staying on her feet. I laid Elena's letter on the table, face down. I laid my legal pad next to it, the pages covered in my careful, dated entries, and then I pressed play on my phone and I set it in the center of the table. The sound that filled the room was Elena's voice, and then the crack, and then Maeve's muffled, restrained, heartbreaking not crying. Daniel's face changed. It did not change gradually. It changed the way a machine changes when a critical component fails all at once, completely, irreversibly. He went from half asleep and slightly annoyed to absolutely rigid, the color draining out of him from the top down. What is that? He said. His voice was very quiet. That is last night, I said. That is Maeve's room. Elena stood up from her chair. You installed cameras. In our home, without our permission. You realize that is illegal. You realize I can. Sit down, I said. I will not sit. Elena, Daniel's voice, very quiet, very different from his usual voice. Sit down. She sat. Did you hit her? Daniel said. He was looking at his wife. His hands were flat on the table. It wasn't. You are not understanding what you heard. He has completely decontextualized. Did you hit Maeve? Daniel, parenting involves. Did you hit our daughter? The third time he said it, each word was separate, weighted, delivered with a precision I had not heard from my son in years. Elena's composure cracked, not completely, not the way a person cracks when they are sorry, more the way a composed person cracks when they realize the story they have been managing is no longer under their control. I lost my temper, she said. It happens. It is not what he is making it out to be. He is doing this because of what I said to him last week. He is punishing me. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, Elena, what I feel about what you said to me last week is something I will deal with privately, with God and with Elena's memory. This is not about that. I slid the legal pad across to Daniel. This has been going on for 3 weeks. These are dates and times and descriptions of what I observed. Daniel began reading. His face changed again as he read, in smaller increments this time, but no less completely. I watched him reading and I thought about how much I loved this man, this sometimes infuriating, conflict-avoidant, absent man who was my son, and how much I had failed him by modeling exactly the behavior that had made him who he was, and how the grief of that understanding was something I was going to have to carry for the rest of my life. Elena said, this is manipulation. He has never liked me. He has been looking for a reason to do this from the day Daniel brought me home. The camera, I said, is not my dislike of you. The recording is not my bias. The dates and the times are not my grief. You're 72 years old, and you're playing spy games in my house, because some letter your dead wife wrote made you feel. Do not, Daniel said, say another word about his wife. The silence after that was complete. I unfolded Elena's letter and I read them the relevant parts, not all of it. I had edited it carefully the night before because some of what Elena wrote was only for me. But the parts about Elena, what Elena had seen, what she had understood, what she had feared, I read those clearly and without rushing. When I finished, I set the letter down and I looked at my daughter-in-law and I said, Elena saw you, she understood you. And she asked me not to let her granddaughter grow up the way you are making her grow up. Elena said, this is insane. And then from the doorway of the kitchen came a small voice, the one voice that had been missing from this conversation, the one that made everything that came before it fall away into irrelevance. Daddy. Maeve stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her hair still tangled from sleep, her eyes moving carefully from face to face the way she always moved through a room, checking the emotional temperature before committing to being present in it. Daniel got up from the table and went to her and crouched down in front of her. His voice, when he spoke to her, was the softest I had ever heard from him. Hey, Bug. Why is everybody awake? She asked. We're just talking, he said. She looked past him at the table, at Elena, at me. Then she looked back at her father. Is Mommy mad? Daniel's breath caught. I heard it from across the room. No, he said. Nobody's mad, everything's okay. She looked at him for a long moment with those clear, careful eyes. Then she said, in a voice so small and matter-of-fact that it broke the room entirely, Mommy gets mad a lot. She says it's because I'm bad. The sound Daniel made was not quite a sob. It was something more complicated than that, the sound of a man who has just understood, all at once and with no remaining possibility of denial, exactly what has been happening in his house and exactly what his silence has cost. I looked at Elena. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small. What followed was not swift or clean or satisfying in the way revenge is satisfying in stories. Life does not work that way, and I would not want it to. Elena left the house that day, not by force initially, but because Daniel asked her to, quietly and with a finality that surprised us both. She stayed with a friend and then with her sister, while lawyers were contacted on both sides and a formal child protective investigation was opened. The recording, once I provided it to the relevant authorities, along with my documented notes and a formal statement, was taken seriously. The investigation found what investigations find when they look carefully at a child who flinches too easily and apologizes too often, not nothing. Elena hired a very good attorney, and I will not pretend the process was simple or painless. She pushed back hard on every front, challenged the recording, challenged my motives, challenged Daniel's fitness as a parent in retaliation in a way that put my son through hell for a period of months. Her attorney filed a complaint about the installation of the camera, which created a complicated legal question that ultimately went nowhere because a consultation with a family attorney established that the recording, while legally ambiguous in some respects, was sufficient for the investigative purposes it had served. I am not going to pretend I had complete certainty about the legality of what I did. I consulted with a lawyer of my own after the fact, and his opinion was that the question was complicated, but that the circumstances were such that the evidence would not be suppressed. I did what I believed was necessary, and I would do it again. Maeve began seeing a child therapist, a quiet woman named Dr. Irene Forsyth, who had an office with soft chairs and a large collection of stuffed animals. Maeve took to her immediately with the particular relief that children show when they realize that an adult is genuinely and unconditionally on their side. I drove her to those appointments every week throughout the fall and the following winter, and I sat in the waiting room and read the same magazines over and over again, and felt something that was not quite peace but was close to it, the feeling of having done the thing that needed to be done, even late, even imperfectly, even at cost. Daniel and I spent a lot of time together during those months. It was uncomfortable in the way that all real honesty is uncomfortable, especially between men of our particular generation who were not raised to say the difficult things plainly. One Saturday in November, about 6 weeks after everything had broken open, he came over to my house and we sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold between us, and he said, "Why didn't you say something sooner, Dad, about any of it, about her? About what you were seeing?" I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it, because I was doing what I always do, I said. I was waiting for it to be enough. I kept telling myself it wasn't quite enough yet to act, and I kept waiting longer than I should have. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I was doing the same thing." "I know," I said. "I think I learned it from you." That was the hardest thing anyone had said to me in a very long time. And the reason it was the hardest was that it was absolutely true. I had spent my whole life believing that my patience was a gift I gave to the people I loved. Elena's letter had told me differently, and Daniel sitting at my kitchen table saying this with no accusation in his voice, just a quiet and painful recognition of something true, confirmed it completely. My silence had taught him silence. My endurance had taught him avoidance. I had modeled a form of love that kept its head down and waited for things to resolve themselves, and he had grown up to be a man who sat on a couch looking at his phone while his daughter was humiliated in her own living room. The thread ran directly from me to him to that moment. I was not the only one responsible for what Maeve had endured, but I was not responsible either. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have been braver a long time ago, for you and then for her." He reached across the table and put his hand on top of mine. He did not say anything. Neither did I. We sat there in the kitchen where the coffee had gone cold, and outside the November wind pushed the last of the leaves off the maple in my front yard, and I thought about Elena, and about how she had been trying to tell me this for 43 years in the gentlest possible way, and how it had taken her death and her letter, and a 6-year-old's broken crayon to make me finally hear it. Elena's situation resolved over the following months in ways I will only describe briefly, because the details are not mine alone to share. The investigation resulted in a supervised visitation arrangement while an assessment was conducted. Elena underwent mandatory parenting evaluation and was required to participate in a structured program before unsupervised contact with Maeve could resume. Whether the marriage would survive was between her and Daniel and the therapy they were both navigating separately and together. I had no interest in the outcome of their marriage, except as it affected Maeve. If Elena did the genuine, difficult, painful work of understanding what she had done and why and how to be different, genuinely, not just performatively, then I hoped for Maeve's sake that she would eventually have a better version of her mother in her life. If she did not do that work, then the legal structure that was now in place would protect my granddaughter in the ways that I had failed to protect her for too long. What I noticed over those months was Maeve herself. Children are remarkable in ways that adults forget because adults have had so many years of accumulated damage. By February, she was laughing more easily. She stopped apologizing for things she had not done wrong. She started asking for things, water, a snack, a certain book, without the careful, tentative preamble she had always used before, the verbal tiptoeing of a child who has learned that wanting something might be dangerous. She drew a picture for me in March, a big messy crayon drawing of two figures, one tall and bent at the middle, her concession to my physical reality, and one small, holding hands. She wrote in careful, uneven letters at the bottom, HAILD and ME. She had not yet mastered the O. I pinned it above my desk, next to Elena's photograph. On a Friday evening in late spring, I sat in my car in my own driveway for a while before going inside. The weather had turned. There were crocuses along the edge of the front walk that I had planted years ago with Elena and mostly forgotten about, coming up every spring on their own without any help from me. I held Elena's letter in my hands, the pages soft and worn now from how many times I had read and reread them. The final line, "If you're reading this, Harold, it means you waited too long," no longer felt like a reproach. Or it did, but it was the kind of reproach that has love underneath it, the kind that a person who knows you deeply offers not to wound you, but to give you the truth you need to finally move. She had been right. I had waited too long. Long enough that the damage was real and the cost was real, and the reckoning, when it came, was harder and more complicated than it needed to be. And I would carry that. I would carry it the same way I carry the knowledge that my silence shaped my son into someone who learned to disappear when things got hard, and that disappearing cost his daughter years of fear. Those are facts. They are measurements, and measurements do not improve by wishing they were different. But I had not waited forever. I had eventually, however late, however imperfectly, put down the endurance and picked up the action. I had done what Elena asked. I had done what Maeve needed, even when she did not know she needed it, even when she had no language for it yet. And something about that, not the revenge, not Elena's temporary removal, not even the legal process, something about the simple fact of finally acting, of standing up in that room on that day and saying that is enough, had settled something in me that I think had been unsettled my entire adult life. I got out of the car and walked to my front door. The crocuses were purple and yellow along the walk. The evening was mild. Inside there would be the quiet of an old man's house, which used to feel like loneliness and lately felt something more like peace. I unlocked the door and went in and put Elena's letter back in the envelope carefully, and I set it on the desk next to Maeve's drawing. Then I made dinner, and I ate it slowly, and I thought about tomorrow, when I would pick Maeve up at Daniel's house, and we would spend the afternoon drawing together, and I would make sure I had plenty of red crayons, whole ones, because a child should never be afraid of breaking something small and ordinary and completely irreplaceable.